Hello, my lovely birdies, and welcome back to my channel. Till now, we saw that Nora was getting into committing suicide. The thoughts was to commit suicide, right? Now we begin with Act 3 today of the play A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. So now, when she was so tensed, Mrs. Linde came up with an idea. So Mrs. Linde had left a message for Croxted when she had gone to his lodgings to have a talk with him about the complication which he had created in Nora's life. Croxted now comes to see Mrs. Linde at the Helmer's apartment in response to Mrs. Linde's message, right? Now, Helmer and Nora are at this time attending the fancy dress ball in the flat upstairs. So Mrs. Linde is alone with Croxted. First, Mrs. Linde explains to him the circumstances under which she had been forced to terminate her relationship with him and to marry another man. She tells him that she had to look after her ailing mother and her two younger brothers, and that it was necessary for her to marry somebody rich enough to enable her to look after them. Croxted says that when he had received the letter from her terminating her relationship with him, the ground from under his feet had slipped away, and that he had at that time felt most miserable. Now, this is a conversation going on between Croxted and Mrs. Linde. Even now, says Croxted, he is like a broken man, like a shipwrecked man clinging to a bit of wreckage. Mrs. Linde thereupon says that she is herself like a shipwrecked person with nobody to care for and with no purpose in her life. She then suggests that if they get married now, they might be able to provide some comfort to each other. Croxted is astonished by Mrs. Linde's offer to marry him. She asks her if she is really serious about her proposal, and she assures him that she is really serious. Croxted feels overjoyed by Mrs. Linde's reply. However, wanting to make sure that she is sincere about her offer, she asks her if she is making this offer of marriage in order that he should spare her friend Nora. She tells him that it is not for Nora's sake that she is offering to marry him. He then feels fully satisfied and says that, in view of her promise to marry him, he would now, of his own accord, withdraw the incriminating letter which he had addressed to Helmer. But by now, Mrs. Linde has charged and changed her view in this affair. She tells Croxted that he should not withdraw his letter because she feels that Helmer should come to know all the facts about what Nora had done. In her opinion, the secret which Nora had been hiding for years from her husband should now become known to Helmer so that all the secrecy and deception should end between Helmer and Nora, and so that they can come to some sort of permanent understanding, right? Then Mrs. Linde then sends Croxted away because the Helmers are about to return from the ball which is going on upstairs. Helmer and Nora now return to their apartment. Nora had wanted to stay on at the dance party for some more time, but Helmer has dragged her away from there because Nora's seductive movements of her body in the course of her performance of the Tarantella had aroused Helmer's passion and he wanted to make love to Nora. Mrs. Linde now whispers to Nora that, in her opinion, Nora should tell everything to her husband. Nora says that she is not going to disclose her secret to Helmer under any circumstances. Mrs. Linde thereupon says that Helmer would come to know the whole thing from the letter which is lying in the letter box. Mrs. Linde then leaves and Helmer tries to make love to Nora, who is in no mood to respond because of her own private anxiety. Helmer gazes at Nora in an amorous manner, saying that she is his most treasured possession and that all her loveliness belongs to him and only to him. He then tells her that whenever he attends a party in her company, he looks at her as if she were his newly wed bride and as if he would be taking her home for the first time. Helmer's passionate manner of talking in no ways affects Nora because her thoughts are centered about the incriminating letter which lies in the letter box. Just then there is a knock at the door. Dr. Rank, who had been attending the dance being held upstairs, was on his way to his house, but passing the Helmer's apartment, he just thought of dropping in for a moment. Dr. Rank had taken too much wine and is therefore in a jovial mood. He tells the Helmers that at the next dress ball he would be invisible, meaning thereby that he would be dead before the next fancy dress ball takes place. He then asks for a cigar from Helmer and Nora strikes a match to light the cigar. Dr. Rank then goes away, but before going away, he drops two of his visiting cards with black crosses on his printed name into Helmer's letter box outside. After Dr. Rank has gone, Helmer decides to open the letter box in order to take out the letters which have accumulated there. On the top of the heap of letters are Dr. Rank's visiting cards with black crosses on them. The black crosses signify to Nora and Helmer that Dr. Rank's death is now very near and that he had left the cards only to apprise them of the fact of his approaching death. The thought of Dr. Rank's impending death puts Helmer into somber mood to Nora now is damped. He then proceeds to read the letters which he has taken out of the letter box. Meantime, Nora has been feeling very nervous at the thought that Helmer would now go through Croxted's incriminating letter and would then decide to take upon himself all the responsibility for the criminal action of which she has been guilty several years ago. She thinks of putting an end to her life instead of having to face a situation in which her husband would be prepared to make such an enormous sacrifice for her sake. Just then, Helmer, who has gone through Croxted's letters, flares up and surprises Nora with his outbursts of anger. Croxted's disclosure of Nora's having borrowed money and having forged her father's signature has come as a great shock to him. But even more shocking to him is Croxted's threat that he would make a public disclosure of all the facts if Helmer does not keep him in the bank at a higher post than the one which he has been holding so far. Helmer gets furious with Nora and says that she has ruined his entire happiness and endangered his whole future. Croxted threat means that Helmer should accept all Croxted demand because if Croxted makes a public disclosure of Nora's guilt, there would be a scandal and Helmer's name would be dragged into the mud. Helmer now tells Nora that he will name have to comply with Croxted's demand, but that at the same time he would not be able to treat Nora with the same love and regard which he has always felt for her. To all appearances, they would still continue to be a man and wife. But the relationship between them would now be of a different kind. He would not be able to trust her any longer with their children because in the light of what she has done, She does not think her fit to continue to be in charge of the children's upbringing. Helmer's reaction to Croxted's letter comes to Nora as a shocking revelation. He had thought that Helmer, with all the moral principles which he had always professed, would never yield to Croxted's blackmail and would defy Croxted, refusing flatly to accept his demands. She had also thought that with all the love that he had been professing for her, and in the light of the sacrifice she had made for his sake, he would take upon his own shoulder the entire responsibility of the criminal deed which she had committed without having realized its implications. But Helmer has lost his temper and taken a drastic decision against her even without giving her a chance to explain the circumstances under which she had entered into that transaction with Croxted several years ago. But there is yet another shock in store for her. Just at this time, another letter from Croxted comes through a messenger. In this letter, Croxted had said that on account of the good luck that has befallen him in the shape of Mrs. Linde's offer to marry him, he no longer bears any grudge against Nora and her husband. In this letter, he has offered an apology to Nora for having written his previous letter and for having tried to blackmail her and her husband. On going through this letter, Helmer feels overjoyed. This letter has put an end to all the tormenting anxiety which he had been experiencing only a few moments ago. This means that there will be no scandal and that he will be secure in his position. At the same time, his attitude towards Nora undergoes a complete change. He tells her that the crisis with which he was faced is over and that they have now nothing to worry about. He tells her that he has forgiven her for whatever she had done and he will again love her, protect her, and guide her through life just as he had been doing before. He says that now she is his property in a double sense because he has given her a new life by having forgiven her. He goes on to say that she has now become both his wife and his child. In other words, he will love her as a wife and he will protect her as if she were his child. Helmer's reaction to this second letter from Croxted shows that Helmer has relapsed into his former self complacency and has once again assumed the role of the possessor of his wife. Croxted's second letter has made Helmer forget all those offensive remarks which he had made to Nora only a little while ago as a consequence of the first letter. Helmer's behavior after going through Croxted's first letter and then after going through Croxted's second letter has revealed to Nora the true character of her husband. It has become clear to her that he is not the kind of self sacrificing husband that she had thought him to be. It has also become clear to her that the moral principles which he always used to profess were not genuinely held by him. She has discovered the hollowness of his moral principles and selfishness of his love for her. She has also discovered his egocentric nature and his unabashed self complacency. As a result of these discoveries, Nora now takes a crucial decision so far as her relationship with Helmer is concerned. Nora now tells Helmer that having discovered what he really is, she has made up her mind to leave him altogether. She says that he is not the man she had thought him to be. She says that he has always treated her as his doll wife, just as her father has always treated her as his baby doll. She says that she has always been adopting his opinion and views and conforming to his taste just as she had as a girl been adopting the views and opinions of her father. But now she is no longer prepared to continue to live in a doll's house. She has discovered that she is an individual in her own right. She has discovered her own identity. She can no longer continue to accept the so called ideas and views of society. She wants to discover for herself what is right and what is wrong. She is not prepared to accept even the teachings of religion blindly. She would go out into the world to gain first hand experience of life and to find out whether she is right or society is right. She must test the traditional ideas of society by her own experience. She tells her husband that his treating her as his property and as a doll is a traditional way of treating a wife, but that she wants to find out her own potentialities. She would not mind even leaving her children in order to arrive at her own conclusions about life from her first hand experience of it. Helmer tries to dissuade her from leaving him and her home, and he repeatedly appeals her not to leave. But her mind is made up. She says that more sacred than her duty to her husband and to her children is her duty to herself. She takes back from Helmer the wedding ring which she had given him at the time of marriage, and she then makes her exit from the house, slamming the door behind her. Got it? Now that marks the end. Then Nora leaves her home, her husband, and even her children in order to establish her own identity and individuality in the world and in order to form her own ideas and opinion. Her action is a symbol of the liberation of the individual from the traditional bonds and restraints under which the individual suffers and which hinders one's development. But more than that, the drastic step taken by Nora was at that time a trumpet call to the woman of the time, to all the women of the time, to assert their rights and not to continue as the property of their husbands. So, this was all about the three-act play of A Doll's House. Now, after listening to the entire story and the entire explanation, I would like you all to comment down below the themes and the message, whatever you understood of the story, to write down, and then I'll be seeing to it. And that marks the end of A Doll's House by Henry Gibson. Further than that, if you want me to discuss more questions, and if any question you have, the significance of the title, the themes, and anything, you can just comment down below, and I'll be coming up with that video as well, right? So for today, that is it. Take care, bye bye, and keep learning.